And joining us now, Biden campaign co-chair, Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. All right, Senator, let's try to talk about the nitty-gritty of debate prep, because, you know, we just heard David and I talking about how to cover Donald Trump as a presidential candidate. He is a presidential candidate. He's about to be the nominee for the Republican Party, and he will be standing on that debate stage. David calls it a joint media appearance with President Biden in just a few days' time. With as many viewers as this debate is probably going to get, probably north of 80 million viewers, what are the opportunities that you believe the Biden team has?
I think there's an opportunity here, Katie, for a stark contrast that'll allow the average American who may not have been paying a ton of attention in the last couple of months to just how unmoored the former president has become, how focused on vengeance, how committed to advancing more big tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans and the most profitable companies, how determined he is to continue ripping away freedoms from America's women and further destabilizing our place in the world, in sharp contrast to our president, Joe Biden, who has a steady, positive and optimistic vision for the future, who's been fighting for America's working families, who's reduced the cost of prescription drugs, helped to deliver record bipartisan legislation that's leading to a manufacturing renaissance and rebuilding our country from the inside out and the bottom up by reinvesting in road and rail and bridges and ports. So I think it'll be a stark contrast in terms of the substance. I think it'll also be a pretty sharp difference in terms of the style. I was with them at the debate in Cleveland in the 2020 election. And look, former President Trump is certainly unusual. He ran as an unconventional candidate, as someone who colored outside the lines and was willing to challenge convention. As a debater, he came over the top. He was aggressive, offensive, interrupted absolutely all the time, constantly, and that there are rules this time for moderation and for turning off the other candidate's mic when they speak out of turn or speak too long. That gives me some hope that the average viewer might actually get to hear a clear contrast rather than just what we saw in the Cleveland debate, a word salad of constant assault from the former president.
We have heard a lot from the current president about the threats to democracy, the threats that he says Donald Trump poses to this country, to our elections, to the fabric of this country. Is that going to be the number one issue, in your opinion, for voters, or the voters that have not decided yet? And there are some of them out there. Or do you believe that that's the issue for them, or is it something else?
Look, I think it's the intersection of these three critical issues. One is the very real threat that Donald Trump poses to democracy, not just that, as he has previously tried through fraud and force to overturn the legitimate election of 2020, but that he seems determined to refuse to accept the outcome of this upcoming election if he's unsuccessful. Second, the ways in which he has bragged about putting a new conservative majority on the U.S. Supreme Court that has taken away the rights of millions and millions of Americans, and he seems poised to double down on that if elected again. And then last, President Biden's got a tremendous record of actually delivering concrete improvements to the daily lives of millions of Americans. I would encourage our president not to talk in the abstract about percentages and economic terms, and we have the strongest economy, but instead to focus on new manufacturing plants, high-skilled, high-wage jobs, things that have reduced the prescription drug prices for tens of millions of families, things that have helped reduce the burden, whether it's of student loan payments or the cost of electricity. We have made real progress, and there's more work still to be done. And I think the compelling combination of those three is what's going to lead to a Joe Biden victory in the fall.
Senator Chris Coons from the great state of Delaware. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Katie.